Right, a very warm welcome back. Today we're in Fourways, just north of Johannesburg, and this is the venue for the latest in the series of New Age business briefings brought to you by the SABC, and today sponsored by Transnet. And we're talking about transport. We're talking about you and I as drivers, as pedestrians, and the daily commutes and how it affects us, and also in the case of injury and death, what benefits kick in terms of the road accident fund, which is changing nature and is soon going to be running under the road accident benefits scheme. And we got an inclination just before the break of what these changes are going to be and what they're going to mean for you and I, moving away from the fault-based system to the non-fault-based system. We're going to start unpacking that a little bit further, because I know that you have questions at home. At Morning Live SABC's the Twitter handle. We've got an audience here that are going to help us with that as well. But let's start once again with the Minister of Transport, the Honourable Dipuo Peters. So this RABS RABS sounds like a great idea, and I guess people at home would like to know, when do you anticipate that it'll kick off in earnest?
Like I indicated earlier on, we've already gone through the process of the public comments. We are factoring those inputs into the bill itself as it is, and we will then be processing it for cabinet, whereafter it will then be tabled in Parliament, where again it is going to create an opportunity for the public and the different stakeholders to make inputs to the portfolio committee, and whereafter that National Assembly, it would go to the National Council of Provinces. We also believe that this is one piece of legislation that would have an interest of the provinces as well as municipalities, and I would believe that SALGA as well as the MECs would make sure that the provinces truly engage with the piece of legislation, whereafter it will then be taken to the President for ascending into law. And I would believe, as we speak, the fund itself, and I'm happy the chairperson of the board is here, the CEO is here, they are also getting themselves ready for the implementation. And we would want to appeal to South Africans, once the bill has been taken through Parliament, let us avoid the inclination and the interest of forever taking the process through unnecessary lengthy court processes, because when we do that, we are actually delaying the implementation. So I would believe that the public comments that we have already received, as well as the inputs that we are processing, would make it possible that we cover each and every aspect of the areas that have been said we need to address in the piece of legislation that we are looking at. And we believe this is a real transformative piece of legislation which would make it possible that as a caring government, we truly reach the most vulnerable. Peter, I would just tell you, you would know the number of crashes that happen on Moloto Road, the number of crashes happening on R61 in the Eastern Cape, R31 in the Northern Cape, as well as Liohamka in the Western Cape. The bulk of those people would be in buses and ordinary people who are traveling long distances. These are the people that we are also worried about, who are at present not benefiting. If you have to prove a loss of income, a gardener is the most vulnerable person who's going to lose out, because you can't prove, even if you can prove, the little amount that he or she earns doesn't generate the type of response that we would have wanted to respond. So we are saying this is one way of making sure that we create a South Africa where we can all have a better life for all, irrespective of when you are involved in a crash, irrespective of your socio-economic standing in society.
Okay, all right. Dr. Watson, let me come to you. The Road Accident Fund, unfortunately, the headlines that keep coming up are things such as corruption, attorneys that are unscrupulous, people that are being ripped off by lawyers and all sorts of things, and that you're broke as well, that you have no money, you've got massive shortfall. And I'm just wondering how this is going to change with this new system, because in reality, if a lot of people are already excluded, in the future, more will be included, which means more strain on your resources.
I think let's do it in parts. The first would be the RAF does make the headlines. Although some of it is sensational, a lot of it is manipulated. The truth is it's an institution that matters to society. you just can't escape the reality of car crashes in our community, which is sad. The fact that you have an entity that steps in to help people, even under a law which may have passed a sell-by date, is a good thing, and it's a good sign of government. We then shouldn't underplay the fact that 20 billion rand worth of claims is paid annually through the RAF. So when people say it's short of cash, it's exactly that. It's short. It's not absent. There is cash, 20 billion is paid, and it's short of 8 billion rand, over and above what motorists like yourself contribute through 154 cents per litre of fuel sold. What that means at a macroeconomic level is that one institution has more money than some provinces, and it still isn't enough. And this has been the case for over 3 decades. You cannot ask for clearer signs of a need to change. If you then look at the RABS process, more people become eligible, but in an equitable fashion. In the current arrangement, we sustain, we maintain, we argue for the retention of a system that treats the average poor or unemployed man worse than a child of a rich person. How can we, when 2/3 of commuters, the people who buy fuel, ride in taxis, 15 million people every day, how can we tell them you are good enough to pay to bake the cake, but you are too poor to eat a slice? We cannot perpetuate a system like that, because the poorest are those who need it the most. So under RABS, you will have more people accessing the benefit, but there's a rationalization of who gets what. There definitely is a limitation on the top end, but it's at the expense of ensuring that the average poor person, the gardener who rides and pays his taxi fare, legitimately gets injured, is treated with the same dignity as the multimillionaire who has benefited millions of rands from the RAF. It's high time, it's long overdue. And I will say, as much as we get these headlines about the RAF being insolvent, as much as we get the sensation every time our financials are produced annually, let's not lose sight of the fact that every year we continue to delay this change, which was identified already in 2002 by Judge Satchwell. The liability on our fiscus continues to grow. It's currently 115 billion rand. If we implemented RABS 3 years ago, it would have been 50 billion rand. And those are liabilities you'll carry.
Who's stopping you? Who's been putting the brakes? Is it the lawyers that are benefiting? Who is it?
No, I don't think we should work on who's stopping us. I think as a nation led by the minister, we should galvanize to changing it and not delaying or deferring. Now is the time. Like all the other countries in the world who've moved to no fault, let's do it. It will become sustainable. Our country will be the better for it.
What about the corruption element? Because that's really been part of the problem that's been raiding this fund, isn't it?
Absolutely. You've got different types of fraud. You have fraud common to a public entity, fraud common to an insurance pool where you receive money and hold it. And you have fraud related to our business. You're paying for a past event where you weren't present. But we have a team of 90 forensic officers together with the NPA who take what they do seriously. In the last year, there were over 600 convictions. Claimants, employees, touts, lawyers, doctors, even some police officers were arrested recently for fraud. So we're serious about it. Under RABS, you may have a slightly different risk of fraud because there's no fault. So there's less checking as to the validity of the accident when it happened. But simultaneously, because you're paying in installments, you don't have this case like you have in the RAF now. If you get fleeced, you're paying a lump sum up front for somebody's life, and you have no recourse to go and address it. At least if you're paying in installments, by regular checks and interaction with the claimants, you have opportunity to say, but you aren't crippled. I actually saw you driving the Mercedes-Benz into the parking lot. Stop pretending your benefits are not valid. So I think it's a risk. We don't shy away from it, but we should turn it to look at it to say there's a public entity that takes seriously the fact that it looks after public funds and arrests those fraudsters it catches regardless of who they are. And they are doing this more and more. And that's a good thing for our country.
All right, so we'll unpack again further that. But the other issue is every Easter, every Christmas, we have these campaigns to try and reduce the deaths on our roads and the accidents. And the statistics fluctuate, but generally over a period of time, over years, it's not been a pretty picture. People are just not listening to the messages. It's either they don't care or they don't think that the consequences are serious enough for them to change the way they drive and behave. How are we going to change that behavior? You know, I traveled to America a few years ago, and I went over the speed limit by about 1 kilometer, and my sister nearly had a heart attack because she realized the gravity of just even 1 kilometer above the speed limit. And yet here, we're completely the opposite. I'm just wondering, how do we change this behavior?
Peter, I must on the onset indicate that the road safety campaign and mobilization is not only intensified during the Easter and the festive season. We have a 365 days campaign. Every day of our lives, it's Road Safety Day. But what is important is the fact that as to what extent do we then create an awareness and mobilize our communities, our road users to take the responsibility. Apart from what government has done, you will quite be aware that the department has recently published regulations intended to ensure that we deal with the speed coming, intended to ensure that we reduce the trucks on our road after dusk, particularly to travel at a particular time frame. But that on its own will not be so much making an indelible mark in terms of our road carnages. But what is important, we reduce and we introduce, and indeed we are beginning to put the message across to everyone that take responsibility. But what is also important is the responsibility on every road user to not to tweet, not to chat while driving, not to use the cell phones, which is one of the biggest problems that we're confronted with of every motorist. Not to speed, not also to ensure that you use an unroadworthy vehicle. But having identified all those, what are we doing to ensure that we put the necessary infrastructure to deal with those issues? The Minister has last week launched the National Road Safety Advisory Council. That is a panel of all experts that will be advising the Minister together with the RTMC what are the necessary interventions that we could be putting. We have partnered with a number of stakeholders, in particular your soccer players, soccer stars, your TV stars, simply because they are the role models to some of our people, and people understand better when they're talking to the role models. We have also partnered with the faith-based organizations because we do believe as a country that most of our citizens listen to the pastors, listen to the ministers more than they can listen to an ordinary person. But at the very same time, we have also dealt with the shock therapy. We have partnered with the Disabled Association of the Disabled People in South Africa through SHARP, simply because those people have been involved in accidents, they're the casualties, they can better communicate the message to the road users that don't be like me. If you're not taking the responsibility, you're going to be getting into this situation. Please avoid the situation. But what are we doing internally? As the law enforcers, we have also changed the curriculum of our law enforcers simply because we identified that there was a gap in the law enforcers. We are currently developing a curriculum for road safety officers because road safety is a profession. Road safety is a long-term investment. To that extent, you want to ensure that those road safety officers are schooled, are educated to deal with the eventualities. Apart from the fact that as a nation, we must also appreciate that it's through education that we can begin to change the mindset. To that extent, we have partnered with the Department of Education to introduce road safety at the tender stage to ensure that this investment, sometime to come, it will, of course, translate into meaningful interventions.
All right. We're going to unpack all of this because, I keep saying this, sadly. Human beings are funny creatures, and until they realize that there are consequences for their actions, behavior modification becomes very difficult, and they hear it. Mom, dad will say, don't do this, and the kids will do it until they're punished. So maybe we'll unpack that. But one picture, I hope you can pick this up in front of me here, and we're talking about vehicles. Can we put that on the screen? Because that's the kind of thing I think that's out there at the moment that we're seeing out on our roads, and perhaps this is something that we need to manage. Can people see that? When we come back after the break, we're going to unpack this kind of image and also find out why you are misbehaving out there on the roads. Okay, all of that coming up after this break. Stay with us.